Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm excited to have a guest on the line here, again from the US, Mr. David Abrutyn from Bruin Sports Capital. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you, Marcus. It's great to be here.
No, thank you. It's a morning here in Kuala Lumpur, so I'm sitting here with my coffee, and I guess you have a bit of a later evening there in your part of the world. But as we always kick off, first of all, let me quickly introduce you a little further, and then we get into your storytelling there. So David had a very illustrious career. I would call you a bit of a hockey man there, especially in your early days, and I believe you're still involved in it, so you can tell us a bit about that later. But I think you started with the Washington Capitals, and then you spent some time also with the NHL in your hockey days, I guess. And then you had a very illustrious career with IMG for 15 years, and we'll dig deep into that side of it. And of course, now you're with Bruin Sports Capital, which is another great and exciting topic we will touch on. So, David, tell us a bit of how you got into this world. I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I think it's around the same time when I started the business as well. So I think we're probably in a sort of similar space here. So please, love to hear how you got into it.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think my story of entry into the industry is similar to many in that I started off as an intern back in my junior year of college or university, depending on where you are in the world, and had the opportunity to do also similar to many people. One of my dad's tennis buddies happened to be the vice president of or senior vice president of marketing for the Washington Capitals, and knowing I was a fan and had an interest in marketing and sports, was able to intern during my junior year of college over the summer, and work in the back room supporting the sales staff, and got a window into what it was like to work inside of a professional sports team organization, which externally you have this perception of what it may be like, and how big and all the exciting things that you anticipate. Yeah. And had the good fortune to realize that it is while it's big, it's more family-like in many respects, and it was a small organization where I got exposure to different parts of the business, from sales to marketing to communications, and even a little bit of hockey operations. And for me, the light bulb went off that not only could you have an interest in those things, but in something that I was passionate about as a sports fan, and my interest in those things from a business standpoint probably mattered more than I was a fan. But that's when the light bulb went off, and I said, geez, wouldn't it be great to maybe get a job when I graduated? And sure enough, I did a nice enough job during my internship, and was told that when the time came when I graduated, if I wanted to start my career in the back room selling tickets, that opportunity was available to me. So that's kind of how it all began.
I love it. Yeah, and I've heard this several times. Scott O'Neill, which I'm sure you know well, he has a similar story, how he started with an NFL team in this sort of back room similar way. So, I think many of us start that way. And I always point that out to, the sort of the younger generations here who may be studying sports right now, that is a great way of doing it. There's no doubt about it. But then you ended up at the Sports Business Daily, which obviously is still around till today. Leading publication really, in the U.S. for sports. How do you get in there, and what was your role there?
Yeah, so I think the transition to the Sports Business Daily is also something that I think other people who've had a career in the industry found along their own journeys, and that's that while I was working at the Capitals, I'd gotten to interact with a gentleman by the name of Ed Quinlan, who was the head of communications for the team, and got to know him a little bit. And somebody had reached out to him who was looking for some young, hungry salesperson to help support an idea for a new sports business publication that was coming into the marketplace. And Ed called me into his office one day and nicely said I was doing a great job there, and although he knew I enjoyed myself, there was this person that he wanted to meet that had this great idea for a sports industry trade publication and was looking for a young, hungry salesperson. And he thought of me and made the introduction to Jeffrey Pollack, and I met with Jeffrey, and we kicked it off, and ultimately, as Jeffrey got ready to go and get the business launched, he reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in coming on board and helping lead the sales effort to a trade publication that was attempting to take on the business side of sports. And in 1994, the company Jeffrey founded was the Digital Sports Network, which back then the internet was not as prevalent as it is today. And in fact, the publication launched via fax machine for the most part. The daily was 14 pages delivered by fax right around 1 o'clock every afternoon. And to me, one of the things that was attractive about it was that it was in this digital space. It was in the business of sports, and Jeffrey was a sharp young person, and he knew a lot of different people in the sports industry, and I thought that that sounded interesting enough to me, and I wasn't afraid of making 100 phone calls a day, because that's what I'd been doing, trying to sell tickets, and decided to go take the leap and see if I could make a difference there. And so I transitioned out of the NHL right before the first labor issue that they had in the 1994 season, and switched gears to the Sports Business Daily. And at the time, baseball had canceled the World Series for a labor dispute. The NHL was having its challenges, and soon thereafter the NBA would as well. And so the business of sports was thrust onto the front pages of not only newspapers, but the front of the sports pages. So our timing was, I guess, fortuitous, although at the expense of the challenges with collective bargaining and all the issues associated with that. But if you could pick a time to launch a sports business trade publication, that probably was it.
Right. Okay. I didn't realize that you were part of the founding team in that sense. That's awesome. So that must have been a really exciting time. So how many how many people were part of it? Just a couple of
you guys? There's and some of them are still great friends of mine today. Abe Madcore is actually still leading the charge as the editorial director for not only the Daily but the Journal as well. One of the original staff writers was Chuck Todd, who people in the American audience would now know as the leading political correspondent on NBC network. And there was a team of staff writers, and there was a marketing team of myself and one other person. So it was 10 or 11 people working out of a small townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia, trying to carve out our place in the minds and in the fax machine inboxes at the time of sports industry executives. And it was a fascinating entrepreneurial experience to be part of building something that today we look back on fondly. The fact that it's still there, and B, that it's become the invaluable resource that it has in the industry, particularly from a U.S. perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but it sounds like you were really in the sales side of it, right? And does that translate then into your next role? Then was IMG? Was it really that you were seen as someone who knew how to sell, and obviously you were probably built a very large Rolodex at that time with networks? How did you transition then into the IMG role?
Yeah, so fortunately, Jeffrey was a wonderful boss, and we're now great friends and have more of a brother relationship than peer to boss, if you will. And Jeffrey took me under his wing. He was a young guy, and his vision for the Daily was well before its time, and I think the fact that it's still here proves out the validity of what his vision was, that not only could you have a daily publication, but back then, some of the things we did, we were the first business content providers for ESPN Sports Zone, which then evolved to ESPN.com. We did a special customized publication called the NBA Daily that was a daily resource for Commissioner Stern and the executives at the NBA and the teams, building off the same model. Mm-hmm. And I traveled the sports industry at Jeffrey's side, learning the business and making relationships, and really we're having a wonderful experience, but came to realize after almost nearly 4 years that I was in the business of publishing, and for me, I'd always wanted to be in the sports marketing side of the business. And over time and some changes at the Daily when it was time to think about the next step in my journey. There were really two organizations that I talked to. First was the NHL, and then second was IMG, and those were through relationships. I think most people know that Jeffrey's brother is Gary Bettman, who's the commissioner of the National Hockey League, and one of the reasons that I felt the risk of the Daily was worth it was that in the worst case scenario, maybe I'd get a job at the NHL. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, in my case, the Daily succeeded, but also led to me having an opportunity to go work at the NHL, right, and be in the league office on the marketing partnership side and learn how to market a major professional sports league and learn how to interact and how the sponsors utilize that platform. And so I worked on Nike and Nortel Networks and Wendy's and several other corporate partners inside the league. So that was a really attractive opportunity for me. So I left the publishing world and went into the one of the four major sports leagues and got a front row education after spending 3 years learning about the business as a whole, what it would take to be successful inside a major professional sports league. So it was a great experience. I had the opportunity to work with Rick Dudley at the time was the head of NHL Enterprises. He's now the longtime head of Octagon. Ed Horn, who I worked with and for at the NHL, and then ultimately we worked again together in my IMG days. So people and relationships I'm still proud to have today, and it was the right next step for me. And then ultimately, 2 years, nearly 2 years into it, the gentleman who I had spoken to at IMG, Gary Jacobus by name, called me and said, "Look, I know you're doing a great job at the NHL. It's a wonderful place. I know you're a hockey fan, and I'm sure you could have a great career there. But I'm, unlike a couple years earlier when he wasn't really in a position to bring me in, he now was, and had suggested that coming into the global organization that IMG was, founded by Mark McCormack, and with a remit around the world of global sport, building a consulting business inside that could be something that would be really exciting. And he thought I could, do really well at helping the small team of people that had been assembled to do that. And so as hard as it was for me to leave a sport that I love and a group of people that I was really learning from, the entrepreneurial experience I had at the Daily, and the potential to do that on a global scale at IMG, which is founded by Mark McCormack, who had a real sincere interest in the consulting group, was too much to pass up. So I then decided to leave the NHL after my time there and jump into the fabulous world of IMG.
Yeah, and IMG, we all know is it's been one of those legendary companies. I read all of Mark's books. I always had an interesting, I think I had a love-hate relationship with IMG, and I'll give you the short version why. I think it was, as I said, I admired Mark and all the things he's done, of course. But of course, there are the big, 800-pound gorilla most of the time in the room. So as a smaller agency here in Asia, my job always was trying to beat you, or trying to beat IMG at that time, right? And so that was really what drove me, interesting enough. I was very passionately about trying to, take business away from IMG. In my early, I would say the first 10 years of TSA, that's really what drove me. I think later on I realized there's ways to also work together. You don't always have to fight with everyone, but you learn, I guess. But I had as much admiration for the group as I wouldn't say the word hated it, but I did see him as the sort of enemy we had to beat. But you were obviously inside, so that was probably a different look, looking at little mosquitoes like us out here. Now, how did you sort of, going from being truly in the sales world and, going in the consulting world, again, was your job mostly to go find clients and then someone else would do the consulting, or how was the business structured and how it all started?
Yeah, no, it was a combination, and that was part of what was attractive. In my years at the Sports Business Daily and then further on at the NHL, I'm a voracious learner. And I think in my time at the Daily, I had a essentially a real-time, real-world MBA as we were building the business and making relationships and understanding what made the global sports ecosystem function, everything from finance to media to sponsorships and marketing partnerships. And if you're going to be a voice for the industry, you better be able to speak critically about the issues. And that was one of the things that was at the core of Jeffrey's, philosophy for the company. So I ended up getting, a front row education on a lot of that. And similarly at the NHL and working with some of the biggest brands in the world, Nike's and Wendy's, Nortel Networks, Coke was a sponsor, and the league itself was a global enterprise. So to be able to translate that to helping sign clients to help grow the consulting practice, and to be able to do that with the institutional knowledge behind you of the worldwide network at IMG was a very powerful proposition. And Mark had recognized that and realized that if he created a group that had the independence to operate and really function as advisors to the biggest spenders in sports, certainly they would spend on assets and investments that had nothing to do with IMG, but chances were, because they also represented so many things around the world, that some of that money would likely end up in assets and businesses that IMG represented. So it was a win-win. So my job in the early days was help sign clients. And then when we did sign clients, help them navigate and secure their contracts, and then ultimately build activation and marketing and strategy behind all of that. And you do that with the benefit of all the resources and scale and insights that existed inside the world leader that IMG was at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I personally love the consulting part of the business. Unfortunately, here in Asia, not everyone always likes to pay money for it right away. Therefore, you have to do a slightly different business models there. But in the US and Europe, of course, it is way more established, and therefore it's easy to see. Now, the clients you were working with, was it mostly the brands looking at investments in, let's say, sports, and you guys would help them, or you were also consulting to the IP owners, the leagues, etc.?
No, we were brand side consulting inside of the IMG ecosystem. So, Philips and Verizon and, over time, Kia and Marriott and USAA and,
right.
There were Visa, and there were 50 clients around the world that we ended up representing over my time and in the last 7 years when I was leading the group, and it gave us the opportunity to really create subject matter expertise and help people navigate the global world of sport. And if you were a sponsor like the Royal Bank of Scotland and you were thinking of using golf as a platform, the benefits of aligning with the institutional knowledge of IMG were far superior than that of others, in our view, and it helped build a great practice around the world, and everything from Olympic sponsors to World Cup sponsors, and stick and ball sports in the United States, and similarly with rugby and football and cricket and other sports that were germane to different pieces of the global ecosystem. And that's the benefit of the scale that we were able to build over time inside the IMG universe. When I got to the group, we were 11 people, and ultimately Andy Pierce, who is similarly now one of my great friends. We built a great business together with a large group of people that was something really special to be a part of.
Yeah, and in terms of when you speak to clients, right, and they're hiring you at the end of the day, how do you make sure that they don't believe you're just pitching IMG's properties? I make sure that must have come up a few times.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing a little bit because that was, if I was a competitor of IMG, I would certainly attempt to take that approach. But we had a great way of marginalizing that negative selling, if you will, by the competition. One, first and foremost, when you're in the business of representing your client's interests, the quickest way to lose their trust and confidence is to recommend things that don't fit, and to go in and recommend a figure skating property while they may be after a male audience in a certain part of the world. That would be the quickest way that you could find yourself no longer working there. And in fact, I think the scale of IMG worked to their advantage because you had insights and knowledge. Not that anyone was sharing information that shouldn't be shared, but you obviously absorb a lot of that. And so it was very easy to say, hey, if you just hire IMG, all they're going to do is sell you their stuff. But the reality is, more often than not, the hardest sales that were attempted to be made were those in other divisions of the company. The tennis division, the golf division, the fashion group, they all had great properties and some of the best salespeople in the world. But if it didn't fit, I think that's part of what was so important that Mark, who it was, a career thrill of mine to have had the opportunity to interact with him in the early days when I was there, because he was taking an interest in the power of what this group might be able to do as the world of sports marketing was evolving. And he empowered us to do the right thing for our clients. And that's, first and foremost, as a person who built a business on representing the interests of our clients, Mark understood that our clients, in the case of the corporate consulting division, were the corporations. And if you upset them in a negative way, that was not going to bode well for the totality of the organization. So it was pretty easy to debunk that myth, if you will, that all IMG was going to do was sell you their stuff.
Well, that's a good answer. Now, I'd love to talk a bit about Mark McCormack. I've interviewed Don Odell, David Falk, and a couple other legends, which you could sort of almost put a little bit maybe in the similar space. But I've never had a chance to, unfortunately, meet Mark. So you just mentioned you obviously worked with him in some capacity. Tell me a bit about him. How was he? Was he difficult, hard, easy? What was his style?
Yeah, I think, from my exposure to him and the meetings we had and the way that, he also took the time to, once a month when he was coming through New York, they would host dinners with a cross section of people across the company. And I think Mark was passionate about his love of business and his love of the company, and wanted to share his learnings and teachings often as he could. And he certainly did in the number of books he wrote. And, in my interactions with him, he was tough but fair. And it's no surprise, having had the opportunity to be in some meetings with him where at a very high level he was, communicating and engaging, senior management at companies that we were talking to, and to witness that firsthand and apply all of the lessons that, he espoused in his books. And when you had the opportunity and privilege to be with him, it was really special. He was focused. He had a mission for every day. I think if you've talked to other people, Mark was, famous for, keeping lists of things that he wanted to talk to people on these note cards that he'd carry around. And, he was known to call various executives at IMG, and certainly not me, but the people I worked for, Andy Pierce, and, go over certain things on a daily basis or weekly or monthly. And, he was as committed to the business and his clients as anyone. And the passion that he had for that is something that, sticks with me still today. And I think it's what fueled a lot of IMG's growth. And Mark believed in hiring talented people, and giving them the opportunity to go pursue things and do it in a way that worked for the collective group. And that spirit and that DNA was part of IMG, and it's what made it such a special place to work. And it's why that there are so many people in companies around the industry today that are part of the IMG alumni network, if you will. And I was fortunate to have the opportunity in my 15 years there, certainly in the early years, Bob Kane and Peter Johnson and Barry Frank and Alistair Johnson, and these are legends in their field, and Mark assembled them and got them all to work together and collaborate on building a great business. And I think that's a understated part of the skill set that he brought to a highly competitive industry that everybody works so well together internally.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's no doubt there's a huge legacy there, and spin-offs, maybe mini IMGs all around the world. Was he more of a listener or a talker? I'd love to understand that.
I would say he was more of a listener, and when he spoke, he certainly spoke with purpose and intent. And I remember, if you read McCormack on negotiating, one of the things he espoused was, sometimes people like to talk to fill the silence, and when they talk, they're giving away points that may be used against them. So he was comfortable listening, and when he spoke, he tended to speak with purpose and intent. And I think that's a hallmark of some of our greatest leaders and businessmen in history.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on, let's because I think it's a great way to transition. Is obviously the untimely demise of Mark brought in Ted Fosterman in the company, private equity now coming in, and from all the things I remember during that period of time, of course, watching it from the outside, it changed the company quite a bit. I think things the way the company operated, it appeared it became a lot more bottom line driven, right? A lot of the fat maybe got cut out, etc. Talk, and I believe you were still there during that time. So tell us a bit about that transition and how private equity IMG looked like all of a sudden.
Yeah, look, I think this is one of those things where, unless you're on the inside and part of it, it's really hard to understand truly what happened. And the way that I describe it is that Mark was a founding CEO and built a team and people and had a vision for building the company that led it to its place as a global leader. And when you have a sole proprietor, if you will, with a long-term vision and platform, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And when the company transitioned into Ted Forsman and the business discipline of private equity, certainly there was a change in vision, and not in a negative way. I would say it was a more positive way that with business discipline, as great as IMG was with a 40-year history, Ted passionately believed that its greatest days were ahead. And just like Mark believed its greatest days were ahead, they just looked at it through a different lens. So the business discipline that came in, that led to, over a nearly 10-year period, the evolution of the company. And at a time when Mark died, when people were unsure of what was going to happen to IMG, not only did it survive, but it thrived and became an even better, more dominant company as a result of the business discipline that Ted Forsman and the others, George Pine among them, that came in and led the evolution of IMG Academy, led the evolution of various business units, consulting and licensing, led to the creation of IMG College, the furthering of the IMG media business, and all those years later led to a tremendous exit, which validated Ted's vision and the vision of George and the others that were part of the leadership team, that evolution could be a positive thing. And I think without that business discipline, the company probably still would have been great, but we had the benefit and good fortune with sound leadership and financing to back explosive growth of a global company. And that was a tremendous thing to be a part of, because the company excelled and really really became, as many refer to it, IMG 2.0 was a highly successful exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the way you talk about it, and whatever what people, I guess, you can see from the outside, it definitely appears that way, and it almost sounds like it was the perfect test bed or starting ground for what you guys are doing now, right? I mean, if you think of what Bruin sports capitalism, or at least what I can see is, you're looking for those type of companies, right, which are having a good and strong track record and making them better, right, by bringing in these sort of disciplines. So maybe that's a great way for us to segment into the Bruin sports capital world. How do you see your learning from IMG and of clearly what George did and what you guys are now doing and the large picture, and then we'll drill into more of the specifics of what BSC is doing.
Yeah, no, look, I think, George, is I'm very fortunate. We've been together now 16 years, and, my last, 7 at IMG worked, directly for him, running the business unit. And, George is relentless in his pursuit of business excellence, right? And he learned that in various parts of his career, and certainly brought that to IMG with the discipline of business planning and using acquisitions to expand and grow the various businesses that he was responsible for. And when it became time to push out on his own, George had a vision based on his experiences in working with Ted and understanding how to, create value over time for investors, and thought that starting something that would be family-like in its approach, with strong backing, that given our myself and George and Tony Crispino, who was also with us at IMG, and then Jeff Roth, who's also our partner, who helped George raise the money when he was at Allen Company, and we needed someone to handle our M&A work, and George asked Jeff to do that, and it's a powerful team that brought a tremendous amount of practitioners' experience and insight into the investment world, with a focus on media, lifestyle, marketing services, in its broadest definition. And we've been doing it now for 6 years. And George's vision was very simple. It was, let's find great businesses that are run by great people, that are platforms that, by virtue of two things, can perhaps achieve great results. One would be knowledge and insight from our experience in doing everything from selling tickets and sponsorships and building brands and managing media rights and all the things that a business owner does. We've probably learned a thing or two over that time that might help a management team either perform better or avoid a speed bump, or as we like to say, we're pretty good at hitting curveballs, and when things go bad, you want to be with people who know how to manage through all that. And so our experience was element number one. And then access to capital that was flexible, and would provide for opportunities for growth acceleration. And that was really the vision at the outset. And I think we've lived up to the vision that George had, and we're at it almost 6 years, and we've done some great things, and we're despite the current environment, we're very optimistic about the future for our industry, our business, and our company.
Yeah, well, and we'll get into a bit more. Well, I would definitely call Bruins Capital smart money as an entrepreneur. If you would be talking to you guys, as you rightly said, you bring not just the money, but you bring an unbelievable amount of experiences and relationships to expand a business beyond, of course, where it maybe is. And I think you've shown that already with Delta Tray and others, which was maybe very European and other market focus, and then you took it into the U.S. market. Now, but let's talk some numbers here. So what I at least read is the original round was 250 million. And then, of course, you were very fortunate to bring another round in just end of last year, I believe, of another 600 million. But I've also seen a number of $1 billion. So just maybe help me out with the numbers here. How did that all stacks up?
Yeah, I think that's mostly right. And what I would tell you is that we're very fortunate to get our start with the numbers you're referencing, and there was an additional infusion of capital along the way as we were building, and then also very fortunate that at the end of last year we closed a second fund, if you will, yes, with the backing of CVC and the Jordan Company, as well as some of the wealthy individuals and family offices that were part of Bruin One. And we're currently sitting on nearly 700 million nice, in dry powder, which we're focused on finding the right platforms and businesses and people to deploy as we go forward.
Awesome. And before we go into the second round, in the first one, the 250 or whatever smaller amount it ended up being, at that level, again, you can only invest obviously in certain sizes, and I know, of course, some of the companies you guys invested in. Talk me a bit through that. What was the criteria at that time, which of course would have changed now with the larger funding. But what was it sort of really, what was the type of businesses or you then invested in, and give us a couple of examples of what worked well? I know one, and I'll pick on later.
Yeah. Just to be clear, though, we were never constrained by capital. We had 300 million and roughly 300 million in committed capital and
Okay.
access given our investors that didn't limit our purview on size of investments.
Okay.
And in fact, over time, we certainly bid highly substantial amounts on other enterprises that ultimately didn't come to fruition. But our lens was always focused on finding businesses for the most part a minimum of 10 million in earnings that we thought we could grow, and we could grow to be as big as the opportunity and the platform presented. And we always knew that we were going to deploy capital against great ideas for either tuck-in acquisitions, which is, if you look back over the course of time through On Location, we added several companies in to build out the infrastructure of On Location experiences and production and event marketing, and ultimately the acquisition of Prime Sport and before we exited earlier this year. And we've done similar with Engine Shop. We've done 3 small tuck-in acquisitions here in the U.S. for a marketing agency that's part of our portfolio. And similarly with Delta Tray, we acquired a company massive for them. So our model was not necessarily restricted by size, but was really focused on scale and the right businesses and the right people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, let's stick on on location experience for a minute, because that's one of your first exits, I believe. What was the investment, if it's something you can share, you guys put in, and of course the exit, I think it's 660 million, which I read. What was the sort of the ROI, the IRR you had, or how do you measure your return on this particular acquisition?
Yeah, what I would say is we don't really speak to the specifics of it, but it was a really great return, for us and our partners in the business. The NFL was a partner. We were partners with Redbird Capital in that, and the objective certainly is to return capital at a rate and at a return that works for our investment thesis. And what I would way I would answer that would be is we're not and don't have pressure to do things, but when there's opportunities to realize value that makes sense, like others in the space, you'd be wise to pursue that. And we did that with On Location, and we're proud of what we built, and we're equally proud of the result.
Yeah. Now, I do think I remember reading about that your horizon is 10 to 15 years, which sounds very long for most sort of private equity groups. Is that correct, or what is it sort of generally what you guys are looking at?
I'm not sure where that comes from. Again, what I would say to you is that obviously we're set up at some point where you do want to return capital, but we don't feel pressure and don't necessarily think about the exit before we even complete the entry. Is how we talk about it. We're focused on building businesses. We've all been builders of businesses throughout our career. George, built NASCAR from a regionalized sport and brought it on to the largest stage possible in the U.S. And similarly, built the parts of IMG, well beyond what people might have thought, and certainly is a huge reason for the evolution of the business of college sports. And so we're builders and growers of businesses, and we're focused on working with management teams to build and grow those businesses. And if you build and grow businesses, at some point in time, you'll have an opportunity to realize that value. But if all you ever do is manage a business through the lens of we have to do something by X date or X time, invariably you'll get distracted from what would potentially be an effective business plan and doing what's right for the enterprise growth over an extended period of time. And I think that's the operator's mentality, albeit with at least of an investment lens on it, that we're bringing to the things that we're doing. And I think if you look at where we are today and the assets we built and the growth that we've been a part of in the portfolio companies, and you alluded to Delta Tray, where tremendous platform and business internationally that did not have a U.S. business when we acquired it, and certainly now is got a very robust business and working with almost all of the major properties in the U.S. So we're practicing what we preach.
Definitely. But at the same time, I don't believe you have a Warren Buffett mindset of, hold forever sort of thing, right? I mean, you're looking for an exit at the end of the day. What type of exit is what what is it? Is it a trade sale? Are you, looking to take company public? What do you see really, or what is there a plan?
I don't think we have a specific preordained outcome that we have to achieve. Ultimately, we are set up to return value to our investors, but again, it's not under the pressure of any particular time window. So, when it's right, you tend to know it's right, and that's when you're building, you're growing. If you're growing, in double-digit percentages every year, and your margins are healthy. There'll be in a time and a place where it makes sense for everybody to transact, and we're focused on building great businesses with great people, and the rest of the dynamics of that tend to take care of themselves when you do it.
Interesting. So the investors are, again, then obviously have a bit of a long-term view in there as well. They're happy to wait, or they get, annual returns in some fashion, or how is the fund structured?
Well, that's why I said we won't get into the specifics of how the fund functions. But, certainly our model has been embraced by our investors, and our proof of the businesses we're building reflects that. And, like I said, we're anxious to deploy the latest round of capital and continue to build and do great things with great people and great businesses.
Yeah, before we get to the big money, I want to talk about Courtside Ventures. So it sounds like you created almost a bit like a VC element to it, where you can invest in smaller tech companies. Is that correct? Would that be the right interpretation, or?
Yeah, I think the vision and thesis for Bruin has always been about acquiring majority control of businesses, and we do like management to retain some equity because we think it creates long-term alignment as part of our model on Bruin. And when we got started in the early days, I think it was always part of George's vision and that of some of our early investors, Dan Gilbert in particular, who is a big believer in supporting entrepreneurialism and particularly in the digital and technology space. And what we realized as we started moving around is that there was an opportunity there. So we created Courtside Ventures in I believe it was January of 2016, and we help oversee that. George does, and it's enabled us to have a VC platform managed by Vasu Kulkarni and Deepan, and they're the ones that run it day to day, if you will. And I think we've made I think 38 or 39 investments. I wouldn't quote me on the exact number, but early stage, Series A, Series B, and a cross section of transformational and disruptive technologies. And it's enabled us to keep an eye on emerging trends and platforms, and probably makes us all look a little cooler and more tech savvy than we actually are.
Well, that's fair. And it is obviously very different, right? Startup capital or startup venture versus what you're doing, what you're looking at. Totally different space. But I'm assuming, and that's why my next question here is that when you do these things, you will look at a lot of cross-fertilization, right? Whether it's the startup being able to play with your big boys, your bigger investments, or the other way around. How do you do this? I mean, is there always that constant look for how do you create the 1 + 1 = 3?
Yeah, look, again, as operators, we tend to know that you can't force things. You got to let things evolve naturally. And what we want to do is create a platform for that creativity and that natural collaboration to work together. Right. Delta Tray in New York, shares office space with Engine Shop. There's times where some of our companies have collaborated on things, and certainly as it relates to the startup elements and some of the companies at Courtside, we definitely made some introductions, and then you tend to let that organically flow. But certainly being part of the ecosystem and creating and fostering that platform for collaboration is, I think, one of the lessons and things that you take from your journey along your career, and we certainly applied that into the Bruin ecosystem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I love what you guys do. I've spent quite a bit of time on the website earlier, and I like the sort of the vision, the values. They really relate to what we do as well as a company. I like the focus, the culture part to it, the big ideas. I think you really, I think you're capturing all the right things there. Now we're in an interesting time for the industry, right? On one side, most of the businesses we're dealing with right now, or the business we deal with isn't happening, which I'm certain some of your investments are hurting as well. And at the same time, of course, it opens up this huge opportunity to buy into potential new projects for pennies to the dollar, and sitting on 700 million, as you mentioned earlier. So how do you guys balance that, working with your current investments and trying to make sure they survive this winter here, and then looking forward? But let's stick to the dealing with your current guys before we get into
look, we're really proud of all of our management teams and executives in our various companies. They're all navigating the disruption very well. Fortunately for us, we've never been big users of debt and financial engineering. Our businesses are all in strong positions from that standpoint, and have really good balance sheets, and that makes you able to navigate bumpy waters. And I think that sports will reemerge, and as sports always has been, they'll be part of a unification and an escape from what the world's been suffering and living through. And while certain elements of our industry may be different over time, as the vaccine needs to get developed, sports is a platform that I think is still got a very bright future ahead of it. And so we balance out the comfort and quality with and caliber of our management teams, and at the same time keeping our eye, and we're involved in several discussions now with enterprises that we hope over time, as the fog gets a little clearer, that we'll be able to get a couple things done this year, and keep going forward with the knowledge and the learnings that this type of environment is providing the collective industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned earlier you normally take a majority. Is that just 51%, or that is a much larger slice? Is there a formula, or not really?
No, it's not. There's not necessarily a specific formula. We want to do what's right, and we always want to have a great alignment with our management teams, and you usually find the right balance when you're going to do something. As I think has been widely reported, as an example, we own 75% of Delta Tray, and management owns 25% as an example.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, and well, first of all, I will, hopefully all your investments and your companies will survive this. It is really cash. It's all about cash flow right now, and preserving that. And I'm certain you guys will be right on this and helping them, supporting them there, and hopefully. Now, looking at the next year and a half until maybe some of that dust here settles. Clearly, there are plenty of opportunities. One thing I haven't seen you guys yet in it, and maybe you hasn't been able to work out yet, is I haven't seen you guys investing in actual clubs or teams in whatever industry it is, whether it's the NFL or Premier League team or Formula One team. Is it something you guys would be looking at, or you continue to focus more on the, let's say, the agent or service provider side of it?
Yeah, look, I think we're you never say never, and I think you have to take a wide lens, like we always do, and we look at things opportunistically. But certainly a lot of our energy and time is spent on on the platform businesses that we see across the ecosystem, and whether that's OTT, whether that's digital and data driven, like Two Circles, which we acquired early this year. Brand is certainly a huge element of what is going to emerge in a post-COVID environment, and we've got an investment in a brand strategy and design agency, and so we're looking across the ecosystem, and we'll see what opportunities present themselves, and we're not really focused on buying distressed assets and broken things. We want to find great businesses with great people. And while certainly 2020 is going to be a little bit of a speed bump for a lot of people, there's still a lot of great businesses out there. And we're focused on finding the great businesses and great people who recognize the unique aspects of our platform and our firm and what we're capable of helping them do. And for those people, we think we're a welcome source of funding, capital, and resources to help them, fulfill the true vision of their businesses.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Interesting you said the word you're not looking for distressed assets, because distressed asset, in my mind, it doesn't have to be a negative, right? If you are a great football team or whatever sport it is, but currently because revenue streams are disappearing, you are struggling, and therefore your price lowers. That wouldn't be necessarily a bad opportunity in my mind. How do you see that?
I think by distressed, it's more, broken businesses that need a lot of fixing. That's not our model. It's always, there are certainly other people that do that, but we've really been focused on are there platform businesses that we can build, and is there potentially going to be a small reset, if you will, on some of the dynamics of pricing in transactions. I think we'll have to see what happens in the future, but we're very focused on great businesses that under the additional support, guidance, and access to capital can excel and grow into the future.
Yeah, no, and I like that. I think it's on the website, which talks about George. I think he uses the analogy of the Wayne Gretzky analogy, right? Don't be where the puck is, but where the puck will be going or moving. And I think that's sort of really the essence, I guess, of what you guys are looking for, right? That type of business.
Correct.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, I mean, overall, the period of time, and we're sort of getting to the wrapping up here, the discussion, which was really fascinating. I love the things you shared with me. What is the biggest learning for yourself, as an individual, and if any of those nuggets you could pass on over your, career?
Yeah, look, I think for me, been very fortunate to have mentors and people I've learned from along the way. And I think that's an important part of career and professional development, is to seek out those people who can help you, because nobody succeeds on their own. I think you really do need a village of people to help you along the way, and that's your peer group as well as people that you may work for. I think it's critical that in a post-collegiate environment that you pursue knowledge on your own, and become someone who absorbs and seeks out information that will help you learn what you need to be successful, to take each next step in your career, and you never know when that's going to be. So what you want to do is, arm yourself with the experiences through what you're doing day to day, the relationships, who are people who may help uncover those opportunities for you, and then through your performance, right? You have to work hard and put in an honest day's work, and I think it's critically important that you pursue knowledge to help you do that. I'd also add that I think the importance of developing communication skills to be able to relate to people and communicate with people is more important today than it's ever been. Because that leads you to building that network and platform of relationships that hopefully as you move along in your career will be opportunities to either work together or transact together. And people like doing business with people they like, and I think people lose sight of that sometimes as they're forging their own aspirations. And for me, that's been a critical learning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree to the last statement there. Right. The other part I always love asking my guest is what didn't work, right? And whether that isn't maybe related to something. Is there an investment you guys did which just hasn't worked out, or maybe something in your other career path where you would say, yeah, we would do that differently now?
Yeah, I think for me, the way I'd answer that, because I really don't, have many regrets, if you will, on the various steps in my journey, and I've had the good fortune to, travel the world and attend the world's greatest sporting events and work in an industry that is really at the forefront of dream making and dream fulfillment, as I like to describe. I think the learnings, if you will, or the challenges are when, in my case, when we didn't win a pitch, or we lost a client. I think you learn more when you lose in business, and if you can apply those learnings and get yourself better, that's where you're going to win long term. If all you ever do is focus on the things you do great and don't address your weaknesses, you can't fulfill your full potential. And I think it's an interesting analogy in business, and certainly in sports as well, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
I would totally agree. I think I've learned more in the last 10 years where we made a lot of mistakes than in the first 10 where we made a lot of money. So
Right.
it is what it is, right? Yeah, the scars leave much deeper impressions, and I think that's sort of what you're talking about as well. Now, again, you might not be able to answer that question, but I ask it anyway. Has Bruins had any scars yet, or everything has so far worked out in terms of
No,
investments?
look, we've, and I'll relate back to what I just said. Certainly, there's business that we've pitched because we help create revenue for our businesses, which is again something I think that's unique about us.
Mm-hmm.
We've been fortunate. The things that we've been involved in have gone well, but have we lost pitches we're trying to make for some of our companies? Absolutely.
All
That's
right. Okay. So you actually getting physically involved in the
yeah,
pitching side as well, because
yeah, we
man, that's obviously where you come from. It that's your
yeah.
whole career has been in that
It's
space.
like riding a bike. Once you learn it, you don't forget it.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. So all right. Okay. So you're not just there really as let's call it sitting on the board and talking to them, every 4 months.
Yeah.
You are sort
We
of
make
getting
sales
actively
calls.
involved.
Yeah. I was on 2 sales calls today for one of our companies.
I love it. Okay, awesome. Well, look, David, this was great. We're just about there in terms of time. You shared a lot of details, which I'm sure everyone will be really interested to listen to. Thank you for your time. Good night there in New York, where you are, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon again.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, and hope you and the family stay well amongst all of this.
Definitely. Same to you, and good night.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Cheers. Bye bye. I hope you enjoyed this talk between myself and David. I think there was a lot of amazing insights. But one thing I did forget to mention is that TSA is on a similar mission. We're looking to raise capital now to deploy this here in sports platforms and sports companies in Asia. I see similar huge opportunities here in this part of the world. To deploy new capital. I've always said that in the first 20 years we generated $500 million worth of revenue for rights holders around the world, and my mission is now to generate $1 billion in the next 10 years. Now that will not just be traditional revenue streams, but also be linked to bringing capital to exciting business platforms linked to sports, whether it's tech companies, whether it's clubs, leagues in the region. So that's the mission I'm on, and if that is something which sounds of interest, please get in touch. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.